This is another exciting day, another shoreline adaptation plan process nearly complete. It sounds like another fantastic process led with mana whenua and our community and the local boards. So who would like to lead off?
I will, Chair.
Good, Natasha, thank you very much.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Natasha Carpenter toko ingoa. I'm the Coastal Management Practice Lead in Infrastructure and Environmental Services. And as you see, we've got a number of speakers with us today, which I believe highlights some of the high level of engagement that we've had on this kaupapa to date. So I'd like to introduce Lara Clark, Principal Coastal Adaptation Specialist in my team, Edith Tuhimata, who is representing Ngāti Tamaoho Trust and has worked alongside our other iwi partners, Ngāti Te Ata Waihua, Waikato Tainui and Te Akitai Waihua in development of these plans, and also Chair Phil James from the Franklin Local Board. So I know that many of you in the room are very familiar with the Shoreline Adaptation Plan programme, with this being the fourth and the fifth plans that we've brought to you seeking approval. So just to summarise, the Shoreline Adaptation Plans are an operational strategic guide to the sustainable management of council-owned land and assets over the next 100 years, and they recommend non-statutory high-level management strategies over the short, medium and long term. The development process of these plans has been well established and it well aligns with the Ministry for the Environment, Coastal Hazards and Climate Change guidance. And it essentially captures some technical work streams where we present the coastal hazards, climate change and risk data, work through engagement with our community and stakeholders, and includes end-to-end mana whenua engagement, which was recently recognised through the New Zealand Coastal Society Terry Healy Award for its contributions to sustainable coastal management. And as you can see from the bubble here, the Shoreline Adaptation Plan programme is part of a wider ecosystem of council projects, including Te Taruki Atawhiri, Auckland's climate plan, where under the Resilient Communities and Coasts theme, this really contributes strongly to some of the implementation of the plan. Obviously, recent storm events have really heightened some of the awareness of natural hazards and climate change, and the Shoreline Adaptation Plan programme is well versed in communicating coastal hazard and climate change risk to communities and engaging with them regarding the role of council, and council really putting the best foot forward in terms of how we manage some of our own public land and assets. And recognising this, we've received additional funding through the annual budget Storm Recovery Fund to accelerate the remainder of the work programme. So today you're seeing us for the first time bringing to you two plans that have been developed and presented in parallel. From this point forward, you'll be seeing us coming more frequently with tranches of plans as we cover off the remainder of the region, with the intention to complete all plans on an accelerated programme by mid-2025. And this will enable us to move on to really the pointy end of the discussion, which is really the implementation of the plans. So in terms of today's plans that we're presenting to you, I'd just like to acknowledge the Franklin Local Board. Both plans have been endorsed by the Franklin Local Board, but I would like to draw your attention to the resolution for the Manukau South, which includes a number of clarifications for specific stretches. The project team have reviewed these clarifications and have had a further workshop with the Franklin Local Board, where we've made a commitment to reflecting the outcomes that the local boards seek, but believe that we don't require any changes to the management strategies as have been presented within the existing plan to achieve these outcomes. I think it's also important to note that these are non-statutory high-level plans, so there are multiple sort of mechanisms in place in terms of their implementation, and also an acknowledgement that these are really the first generation of shoreline adaptation plans for Auckland, so there will be and need to be further opportunities to review and refresh this information as we get new coastal hazards data, changes in legislation, for example. So before I hand over to Edith, I would just like to acknowledge Carl Flavel from Ngāti Te Ata Waihua, who unfortunately sends his apologies and was not able to be here today, but has provided us with a letter of endorsement, which I understand will be included within the minutes of this meeting, just acknowledging the mahi that he has contributed to alongside the Shoreline Adaptation Plan project team. And we have a number of other members of our team that hold a lot of those relationships and partnerships with us today. And yes, and with that, if you would like to, Edith, then I'd like to hand over to you through the chair.
Morena koutou, tēnā tātou. I ngā mana, i ngā reo, i ngā karanga maha me ngā rangatira, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia tau te rangi Māoria, kia toi te mana, kia tau te Māori, I rungi a tātou katoa. Kia ora. My name is Edith Turumata. I am the kaitiaki taiao mō Ngāti Tamoho. I am the manager of the environmental unit for Ngāti Tamoho, and I am here to endorse the shoreline adaptation plans for the Manukau Harbour. For a long time now, we know that I am uri o Waiohua. Waiohua has been occupying the Manukau Harbour for over 1,000 years now, so we have a huge knowledge base around this particular area. We find that we're the poor cousins on the Manukau Harbour side. The Waiawai has been in play for many, many, many years, but we still haven't been able to sort of talk about restoration and looking after our harbour. This is one of the only sort of projects that we've had that are looking towards restoring and trying to maintain some lines of defence when it comes to our cultural heritage around the Manukau Harbour. So that is why we have been working with the Coastal Adaptation team to input our mātauranga Māori in this particular aspect, because we have relevant traditional resource methodologies that we can use to help us restore our harbour and do something for our harbour. It is culturally significant to us. As I said, we've been there for 1,000 years, but we have watched over a long period of time huge infrastructure and huge amounts of money going into infrastructure within the Manukau Harbour, but we haven't actually had any funding ourselves to be able to do our work. When we're talking about that sort of funding, we see huge amounts of money going into the central interceptor. We see huge amounts of money going from water care to the infrastructure for water care, healthy waters. But none of those funds actually come down to us. So this is why we're here to endorse the shoreline adaptation plans, because a lot of the time it comes down to the funding and we don't get it. So this is the reason why Ngāti Tamoho is here today, to endorse these shoreline adaptation plans, and we're hoping that we can all work together to have a good outcome on the Manukau Harbour. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Edith. And through the chair, if I can invite Chair Phil James to speak.
Kia ora all, councillors, and to my colleagues here, and thank you, Edith, for your words as well. So we're very fortunate, Franklin, this is our third shoreline adaptation plan, so we're very grateful that Franklin has enjoyed being able to have these plans put in place. And I do remember once upon a time sitting around this table saying it's time we need to start having this somewhat difficult conversation with Aucklanders about our shoreline, coastal erosion, etc. So I'm pleased to be able to be sitting back here now, having been through those. I think the items that have been alluded to in terms of feedback from the Franklin Local Board have been around just a bit of consistency or inconsistency from our view. And because we are responsible to convey the views of our community, that is our role. I just feel I must draw attention to that we have some sites that do have infrastructure, such as wastewater, public toilets, some car parking, those sorts of things, that do have a different classification than what we have on other sites that have the same sorts of things but have a differing classification. So I just feel it's important I draw your attention to those. And perhaps that might be something that could be reflective in your final resolution, that the assurances that we have been given will be taken on board, because we do have a community that is, I would say, somewhat upset. Last night I attended a meeting for our local board plan, and it sort of evolved into the shoreline adoption plan meeting in the end. We've got residents, and this is happening all across Auckland, where residents who can afford it are protecting the Esplanade Reserve in front of them at a substantial cost, and they're willing to pay. And then we have parts of the Esplanade, of course, that's public, that isn't being protected, like Hold the Line. So there might be some things that I'd really be keen to discuss going forward as to how we can make processes and maybe even costs more palatable and easier for people to take charge and be able to do more of this protection of the Esplanade Reserve going forward, and maybe do it in sort of sections. Now that we have this plan, we can understand where the areas are that, you know, our communities most value, so we can use the plan perhaps in that way as well. So those are the two sorts of things. I don't really think it's, from what I understand, it's probably not a good time to go into the details of every single one, but I think you're very much aware of them, Chair. And, you know, I think if we can reflect that in the resolutions, and that there is a return to the community, it's particularly the Clark's Beach community, a return to that community to further engage on the outcomes of the plan and what they actually mean, and to give some assurances of what the community is going to be able to engage, you know, do in the future to protect the things that are important to them. Thank you.
Kia ora, Chair Phil James. Thank you very much, and thanks for our discussions. Prior to this, Councillor Baker is keen to move both of these, and I'm keen to second that, if that's okay. And he has a resolution in there that we'll discuss with staff that does, it doesn't say anything either way, but it acknowledges the feedback from the board and says, and asks for the staff to continue to engage with communities to understand changes in the future or no changes in the future, which is, or in my opinion, but Natasha might be able to clarify, but that is the expectation from these plans. It is a living document, it's high level, and then when we get back down into those individual assets, individual reserves, that there will be engagement, especially if there's significant change or a, you know, move away from a reserve, or the need to purchase another reserve inland because of, you know, letting significant changes happen. Or as we've seen this year, those changes happen without consultation because they, nature takes over. So it's understanding how that all works together. Kia ora. So maybe that might lead to, Councillor Baker, did you have a question on that, or are you happy to speak at the time?
I'll speak at the time. I don't have any questions. It's been answered what I was going to ask.
Kia ora. Member Ashby.
Kia ora. First, just to acknowledge you, Edith, and the mana whenua of the manukau that have worked and clearly strongly support the plan, which is great to see. So good job to the council team as well for getting that partnership working. I just have well, two very short questions. The first is there's a couple of sites, cultural sites, that have been flagged up as high risk. So I was just wanting to understand, and I appreciate the detail might not be there yet, but in terms of what are the active steps to work with mana whenua leading that, to actually do something about that, whatever that is that the kind of detail that's in this plan, or is that something that follows on, I guess, out of it? And I suppose that is just a lead into, I guess, what does implementation look like with mana whenua? Thank you.
Kia ora, Member Ashby. If I may address that question through the chair, I've got a couple of slides here, so I'm just going to quickly pop through, bear with me, to our slide which speaks to implementation. so that I may refer to that. So implementation for the shoreline adaptation plans is certainly an evolving space. We've got lots of existing tools and hopefully lots of new processes that we can explore. So looking to immediate implementation with mana whenua, it's really looking to support further discussions around iwi-led adaptation and how we might provide resources and insights to support that to occur. And as we continue around the Manukau Harbour with the Pahurihuri Inlet, Manukau East and Manukau North shoreline adaptation plan areas, that conversation continues with our mana whenua partners on the programme. Kia ora.
Kia ora, and I think I've jumped ahead. So if you want to go back through, sorry, it felt so complete with everyone's, if you want to go back through this, apologies, you should interrupt and say, Chair, you're doing that wrong, but you're very polite. Sorry, could you please go back to, it's been a long day and it's only 12:30. Yeah, sorry about that. If you want to go back to the presentation to give a clear understanding for the members, and then we'll go back into questions. Apologies.
Happy to do so. I'm aware that I'm taking us away from a well-earned break. So I will move through with the assumption that we're all reasonably familiar with this process and we have the two plans attached to the agenda. So just a very, very quick recap on why and what in terms of the shoreline adaptation plans. Whoops, I'm going back the wrong way. We have a really diverse coastline in Tamaki Makaurau. We have over 3,200 kilometres of shoreline. Where that intersects with natural coastal processes, we end up having areas where we have natural hazards and risk to our infrastructure and our resources. Cue climate change and increasing sea levels, that risk is changing over time. So we need to adapt. We need to think about how we manage our coastal areas into the future and take a risk-based approach to that. And in response, we're developing the 20 individual shoreline adaptation plans across Tamaki Makaurau. So in terms of informing these adaptive pathways, as Natasha has already spoken to, we utilise a lot of technical specialist information around risk assessment, policy analysis and advice, and looking at the ecological context of our areas as well. We endeavour to work really closely with mana whenua to understand values, principles and objectives, the areas and sites of significance, and we welcome and are very thankful for the mātauranga and advice that's provided to us by mana whenua. We also want to reflect in the plans who we are providing this infrastructure for, and so look to identify the use and values of our communities, the issues and the aspirations, and also start conversations around risk and risk perceptions and what the aspirations are for the future. So speaking quickly to the development of the Manukau South and Awhitu plans, this involved a lot of time spent in Hui and Hikoi around the Awhitu Peninsula and the Manukau South area with our project team and with mana whenua, and we had the privilege of having mātauranga and a lot of the kōrero of this area of the coast shared with us. For community engagement, we used both in-person events and online forums to gather the understanding of values and views of the community, and this is represented from the maps taken from our Social Pinpoint digital platform. And so that really gives us the heat maps and some of the areas that Chair Phil James has spoken to around Clark's Beach. You will see there in Manukau South have a very high degree of community interest and value. So just refreshing our memory in terms of the adaptation strategies, we have 4 regionally consistent strategies over 3 time periods. So that's really looking at how we are adapting in terms of the way that we manage these coastal areas. And those strategies are no active intervention, where we're really looking to allow those coastal processes to continue. Limited intervention, where we may seek to maintain and use nature-based solutions. Managed realignment or retreat, where we look to strategically plan for the retreat of our assets and infrastructure and land uses in those locations, and hold the line, where we look to defend the current coastline and we think about maintaining particular uses in those locations. So I'm just going to take us very quickly through the Awhitu and Manukau South Plan areas and just speak to a few of the highlights here. So for the Awhitu area, the risks to council-owned land and assets within the shoreline adaptation plan area are very variable when we think about our coastal hazards and catchment flooding, and this is really due to the huge diversity of the coastline here. The risk from erosion in the short term generally starts to tip towards inundation in the mid to long term. So much of the shoreline around the Awhitu coastline can be managed through no active intervention and limited intervention over time, and that's sort of the blue line around the coast that you can see there. However, we do have some areas where we do need to hold the line in the short term. So the area at Tenaio or Taitimu, Hudson or Graham's Beach, which you may be familiar with, is one area in the Awhitu Peninsula where we hold the line. And just acknowledging that that changes to managed retreat in the mid to long term due to that inundation risk. We have a few other areas within the Awhitu area where we also look to managed retreat in the long term, and those are at Waimatuku, Hamilton's Gap, and the Wattle Bay, Ottawa Bay area. Coming through into the Manukau South area, as you can see again, there is a lot of blue around the coastline there. So again, looking at no active intervention and limited intervention in many areas. And noting for this shoreline adaptation plan area, coastal erosion poses the greatest risk to council-owned land and assets around the coastline there. So we have some specific areas in the short term where we do seek to hold the line. The top little purple circle you can see there is one of our Clark's Beach access ways, and then those ones tucked into the bottom towards Waiuku around our existing assets and infrastructure in that area. We also look to hold the line at Glenbrook Beach, but noting that that changes to managed retreat in the mid to long term. And then just reflecting as well that over time with that changing risk profile, we do have a few other locations in the longer term where we identified that managed retreat for assets and uses will be required. So coming back to the slide regarding implementation, just to note that while we are developing the plans over the next 18 months, there is local implementation processes which can start to be put into practice. And then once we have all of those plans complete and we have a regional picture of risk, we can start to think further about prioritisation and potential funding requirements. So that is the presentation and the quick recap that we have for you today, and thank you very much for letting us take that time.
Kia ora, Lara, and apologies again for interrupting. I know how important this work is for all of you and how actually quite small what you were able to present over the breadth of work you've all been working on. So apologies to interrupt that. We'll go back to questions. Councillor Turner.
Thank you. As you described it and the Rodney Board Chair sort of said, you know, this plan only applies to council asset, right? I saw in my head a cancellation of coastline where you've got defended, not defended, defended, not defended. That's kind of not the holistic response that we're looking for. So how do you see this progressing to a place where... That's the first question. One after that, please.
Through the chair, this is really the first step. So the coastline has been broken down into a series of discrete sections, largely based on coastal processes, so that we can have that more holistic view where we're not going to have impacts on adjacent land. But there is that public asset element, which is also quite influential. In implementing any of these strategies, there's a journey from here. So going from the high-level strategies as defined in the shoreline adaptation plans, taking them through into the statutory processes and the consenting, also considering the issues and options that are appropriate. So if we do have a recommendation, for example, of hold the line, there's a number of different ways that can be fulfilled, whether it be through a seawall, whether it be through enhancement of the natural defences that are already available. And part of that is the opportunity to ensure that we have that holistic dovetailing with the adjacent sections of coastline, which is something that we always do in practice with our coastal management when we're looking at specific projects.
Thank you. My other question is scope. I came to one of the presentations in Newland, and you know, on the north side of the Manukau, and I know you're getting to that, there's a place where we had managed advance, which worked well. But most importantly, it's about how you, the scope of the measurement of the impact. So I made an example of another place where Parks is allowing managed retreat, and it's eating away at an area where we've put in other infrastructure like petanque courses and stuff, a place where people like to go and have wedding pictures and wedding events, but just up from there is the local hall, which used to do all the catering for those events. And now that the managed retreat has eaten away this area, made it look, well, partly because of us, we've left all the wooden infrastructure for the seawall behind, but now that it doesn't, managed retreat has had a negative effect on that area. It's having a negative effect on the community at some arm's length, about 200 metres. What's the scope of how you look into, of how you measure whether it's going to be stand your ground or retreat?
Through the chair, Councillor Turner, you raised some excellent points and examples there, and I think that one of the, I guess, the primary reasons for seeking the community input and feedback is so that we can understand some of that context and some of those local links, and that's very important. In terms of the scope of consideration, we do first look at the risk to the assets themselves, but noting full well there are those secondary and tertiary sort of links to that infrastructure. So it's starting with our technical information, and it's building on that with what is shared with us by Mana Whenua and what is shared with us by the community. I guess this is our first step in terms of scope towards adaptation planning at a regional scale. And I think that it's a great opportunity for us to lead by doing and to establish some great processes to have those further conversations in the future.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Filipaina.
Tēnā koe Edith, ngā mihi ki a koe, and tēnā koutou katoa. Look, the question is going to be on the third slide of your presentation. It's got shoreline adaptation plans, why and what. So I see diverse coastline plus natural coastal processes plus climate change, winds, tides, waves, storms. My question is, would the shoreline adaptation plan, in our agenda, has got plans consider 3 timescales. Do you think the 1 to 20 is realistic and appropriate, knowing what we're seeing overseas, knowing what we're seeing here? And it's 1 to 20. You know, and this is why I've asked, is there any need for us, because it's in there, to consider the time scale, is to actually put it within 1 to 10, 1 to 15. I'm just throwing it out there because, yeah, look, that's my apartheid, because it's interesting. It's 1 to 20, and with so much happening, is it realistic?
Through the chair, I think that's an excellent question and an acknowledgement that we're in the midst of some very changing conditions. What we have attempted to do for this first generation of shoreline adaptation plans is fit the current best available data that we have for coastal hazards and climate change to a series of 3 time horizons. I think there's an acknowledgement across the project team that there's a step forward into taking a more dynamic approach to adaptive pathways. So we've set the signals through those time frames, but there is an acknowledgement that there probably is, through the signals and triggers that need to be built in, some potential for, in some instances, that to need to be brought forward. That's something that we'd like to further explore once we've completed the whole of the region, as new information comes through, so that we can enhance that element of the methodology.
So just my last part there. So can I take it that that will be incorporated into the 1 to 20 years, the fact that you can adapt depending on how things go? Can I take that as what our staff will be looking at?
Yes, that is correct.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor, and unfortunately our first plans probably already need updating from what I've seen in those areas from what we'd approved only last year or the year before, which is quite distressing for communities, but something that will have to go on because the nature of that coast has already changed so much. Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. My questions are probably primarily for Angela, but I did just want to acknowledge mana whenua and all the work that's gone into this. I wondered if you had any reflections, Angela, on what this process has been like for the local board, and I wanted to particularly acknowledge the value that local boards are bringing to this process. I thought it was quite a good example of how our local boards do add really useful local knowledge to regional decision making. So I wondered if you would speak to that. Thanks.
Thank you for that opportunity. Yes, we were very delighted actually when we got our first request for the eastern side. So that's the Maraetai Beachlands area. Because for us it was a direct response at something we had raised and we are grappling with all the time, having quite a significant coastline and onto the Manukau Harbour as well. So we've supported those engagement sessions. A few members would participate in those and encourage people to have their say on in the heat map and things like that. I suppose, you know, on reflection, maybe some of the terminology might change. You know, hold the line is a very strong term, and you know, it kind of means hold the line at any cost. You know it's, you know, if you take it from a military perspective. So, you know, in the minds of, you know, residents, that means quite a bit to them, and it not necessarily aligns with perhaps what the intention was with the plan that we have. And I think that's what's brought about some of the issues with Clark's Beach for us, is what hold the line means and what limited intervention and all those sorts of things mean. So overall, it's been good to do, and I think it needs to be done. I don't think it's going to be a fixed thing. I think, you know, we know it's evolving. I would support the comments about reviewing it. I think maybe 20 years does seem quite a way out. I'm also intrigued to know, based on the amendment that might be made, is that what mechanism might be in there that if we had the community engagement ongoing, and then there was a decision, yes, actually, that should change in its category, what mechanism is there for making that change without having to go through a big process of report writing, etc. So if that could be thought about, that would be great, because I think then it keeps the momentum going. We don't have to wait till the sort of next review cycle before we can make any changes. Yeah.
Thank you. I know that when I was in local board land, we sometimes used to do a refresh, which was considered a lower level from a review. You know, for example, a park concept plan where we delivered half the projects and we needed to update things, and there would be a short line out, if you like, in terms of the community engagement. Do you think that's something that might address that need?
Thank you. Thank you. Through the chair. So in terms of implementation of the shoreline adaptation plans, we do have a number of other processes, many of them existing processes, such as the development of local park management plans, where there certainly is that opportunity for further community and local board input into those processes, and I guess to build upon and to clarify maybe how those communities interpret the outcomes that they're wanting to see for those reserves. But as we have noted, you know, in the presentation of the plans and in the documents themselves as well, they are living documents, and they need to be adaptive and they need to be able to respond. So looking at how we can make that more dynamic and less onerous for those involved. And I'd just like to take the opportunity as well to acknowledge both local board and councillors' support of the process. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
That's great to hear. I guess my reflection on that is that perhaps, you know, we need to think about the comms. That's actually, you know, like we often say these are living documents, but then we don't communicate that we are actually, yes, we did that in 2019, but actually this is the work that's happened since. So that might be something for us to reflect on more broadly around the role of comms in this kind of space. Thank you.
And thank you, Councillor. Maybe to clarify, I guess, because this has come up before around what is actually meant, that there is an assumption almost that the council will change these areas to what we've, categorised them as. So I guess if you want to explain maybe just briefly the process for why we're doing this. So I guess from my perspective, when I asked Paul and others 4 years ago, how are we making decisions around coastal assets, because it was very messy. No offence to anyone, it was just hard. There wasn't really any money to do this, and that's why we secured the budget through the long-term plan. So I guess what was happening before, and why is this a little bit of a reaction to the way we used to fund coastal assets before, if you can clarify? Sorry, I probably asked that round the wrong way, but I think it's quite an important story to tell why we're doing this work.
Yes, absolutely. So back in 2017, we developed and published the Coastal Management Framework, which was an acknowledgement that since the Auckland Council had come together into a unitary authority, there was still some inconsistency in the coastal management practices that were implemented across the Auckland region. An acknowledgement that we have a very extensive coastline of 3,200 kilometres, and the need for us to do better and lead the way in that space, and we get looked at quite closely across the rest of New Zealand. So that was really where we presented the need for shoreline adaptation plans, and closely looking at some of our counterparts overseas, such as the UK shoreline management planning approach for some of the best practice examples available there. And that was how this work programme was founded. And it's really a first opportunity to take that consistent and holistic view across the whole of the region. And when all of the plans are completed, that will inform a lot of the key decisions and information at the moment we don't fully understand regarding what are the future costs to implement these different strategies. Where are the higher priority areas, or how do we equitably address some of these coastal management decisions going forward, because we cannot afford to hold the line everywhere, and we can't always maintain the status quo. So that was really where these sort of were born from. I hope that answers your question.
It was a perfect answer. Thank you, Natasha. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, Councillor Ferry must have been reading my mind. The reflections that she sought from Chair Full James. But I wonder whether given that we are looking at this first generation, are there any further reflections that you might give us, Angela, on where you see, if cutting to the chase, where are those big roadblocks going to be?
I think it's really important to do the feedback to the community. So when you take all the information and, there's a lot of personal, things at stake for some people. It's their properties if they're on, an Esplanade Reserve, or it might, relate to their sort of sports club or something like that. So when the information's provided, I think there needs to be really important that comes back to that community before it comes to the likes of us, that they give an opportunity to perhaps disagree or debate certain things, because some of it is a little bit subjective in terms of what the whole idea of this is what's most important, what are the most important areas, and well appreciate that we cannot hold the line on everything. That is totally impossible. But I think we also need to acknowledge that there are people out there that are willing to put their own funding in to protect Esplanade areas who are finding it incredibly difficult to do so, or very costly. And that's why I alluded before, if there was some way we could think about how we could make the process easier, maybe cheaper, but have all the right things in place and encourage people to do the right kind of protection, because often we see some structures that aren't right. So, I think constant community engagement, I think, will be necessary, because they're living it and witnessing it. We aren't so much. Respectful process, yeah.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Kia ora, thank you, officers. Kia ora, Edith and Chair Full James. My question is around what are the factors that are taken into account when you when you pick where to do the shoreline adaptation plans? Because I'm just wondering if intensification of an area is a factor. And I ask this because in my area in Tamaki, we have 20,000 people expected to move in, and our only nature reserve is Waiotaiki Bay, and the walkways there are falling into the ocean. So the local board, the residents, they keep constantly advocating, and it seems to be the answer is waiting for a shoreline adaptation plan. So that's the thrust of my questions, please.
Kia ora, Councillor. Through the Chair, in terms of understanding those future development pressures and the anticipation of growth, but also the importance at a regional scale often of many of those coastal walkways, that is something that we look to identify through our sort of scoping phase with the shoreline adaptation plans, and document that and make sure that we're understanding where those areas are and both the regional and local significance of those. With respect to the sequence of the shoreline adaptation plans, we're actively looking at that along with the accelerated program and how we can make our way around the diverse coast of the region more quickly. But it is a case of looking at a regional risk assessment and prioritising those areas feeding into that, and also some of those pressures from the sort of social and land use side of things. So I hope that sort of starts to address the question, and we do have some further information we could share on that with you if that would be of use.
Thank you.
Kia ora. I guess a question for Edith, and I know you don't speak for all mana whenua, but you can speak from your own perspective. But if you, I guess this is still quite a westernised process that we're trying to kind of get Mātauranga Māori processes into. But how can we do better as a council on things like the coast and protecting, I guess, the ecosystem that Māori have loved for 1,000 years in this area? What are the better ways? You've obviously said this is a good way, but I guess from the feedback, I want to see how we can replicate that into the actions going forward from here. I guess what are your expectations or the expectations from your iwi hapu?
Kia ora, Chairperson. The thing is about, it sort of comes back to what Councillor Ashby was talking about on the cultural landscape, and that is we're so aware of everything that's going on there. The decisions that were made around about the Manukau, around the Awhitu Peninsula, was made largely by myself and my cousin Carl, because we're driving this particular process. But when we looked at all those areas, because I walked that whole coastline from Urua Bay all the way through to Clark's Beach as a young archaeologist when I graduated. That was 27 years ago. And then you've got Carl's expertise in environmental planning. He's got 30 years worth of experience in that too. So we just sat down and we looked at priority areas that needed to hold the line, or places that we could do further restoration in this particular process, or those priority areas. I have a couple of examples of the priority areas. I mean, Waititi Pa is one that Angela was just referring to, in Clark's Beach and everything like that. It's sitting right there on the coastline and everything like that, but with the inundation and everything coming up, is it wise for us to put trails around that particular aspect? So this is why further conversation has to be had. If you wanted an example of the managed retreat stuff, well, that would be Whātāpaka, our marae there, in the extreme weather events that have just happened. We've had our urupa has had a slip. We've had houses lost down there, and because of the neighbouring farmer doing his adaptation on his land, the water came straight through our Whātāpaka marae, and it's been. We have to practice a managed retreat for our Whātāpaka marae. The thing is that it's a huge cost to our people. So how are we going to manage it when we know that we've got to do that? Those are the sorts of ways for funding for priority areas that you guys could help us in this aspect and everything like that. To us, it's not just about the council assets, it's cultural assets that are situated all the way around the Manukau Harbour, you know. And we've been saying this for a long time, probably for the last 8 or 9 years, how we are effectively going to address what happens to our cultural assets should this happen. And so, you know, just with these last extreme events, we saw it just absolutely blitz our marae and our urupa and everything like that. Listen to what the mana whenua are asking for and actually saying, because we've been reiterating this for so many years now. Help us with this stuff. Help us with the funding, you know. Those are ways that the council could help us in this particular aspect. You know, and there's nothing that we don't know about our coastal areas and stuff like that. So the Mātauranga Māori component between Ngāti Tiata and Ngāti Tamaoho is what is driving this shoreline adaptation plan, because we know that there's stuff to do. For years I've been saying, you know, we need more funding around looking at the erosional processes, because we know that happens. But, you know, this is the first sort of project that we actually have the ability to do something about it. So, yeah, just acknowledgement and trying to help us with those aspects is a way that you could all help. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, and thank you so much for sharing what are clearly extremely tough situations for your whānau and your iwi in what physical infrastructure, but also what the natural environment is doing to your cultural artifacts, but also your people and what you're connected to and what we're all connected to. So thank you. There are no more questions. Oh, kia ora, Councillor Bartley, yes?
Oh, kia ora, Chair. I just wanted to know how our resolutions up there can reflect the support from a change in how we're going to implement this that backs up what Edith was requesting from us. So is it a partnership with mana whenua?
I mean, in my personal view, I feel like this process is in partnership. I think it is one of our better processes, but I trust the team are working that through. Paul, if you did you want to maybe, or Natasha, did you want to confirm that is the intention already? I don't necessarily know if we need a resolution, but
Through the Chair, absolutely it is the intention, and perhaps Part D there is a signal towards that through the Coastal Renewals Work Programme, be that just one specific element of implementing the shoreline adaptation plans, but that recognition of the need for ongoing partnership as we work to implement the plans, I would say sort of a signal to that commitment.
Perhaps I would like to see the words prioritising what you get from that ongoing engagement. Prioritising that perspective, because it's the only perspective.
Do you have some words that we might want to add to, is it?
It will be prioritised. With D, perhaps after with local iwi, adding that will be prioritised.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it is, but I will just, our processes are.
It's not really, it's more like part of the feedback that we get from everybody, but there's no priority given to it.
I guess, yeah, I'm not going to argue. I feel like with this team that what is happening, but I'm not going to not put it in there to make it look like we're not prioritising.
Yeah,
Through the Chair,
Sure.
if we might suggest in relation to line D, that the inclusion of the Coastal Renewals Work Programme is one of the sort of the local or the now implementation actions. We could also add into there that the implementation of the Shoreline Adaptation Plan program will be progressed once all of the plans are finalised, and that will continue to seek that partnership with mana whenua through implementation, or words to that effect. The sort of acknowledgement of the implementation of the wider program.
Would an E maybe, Councillor Butley, prioritise the ongoing program in partnership with mana whenua? Would that help? I think that, sorry, Megan, I think they're two different things. So that the D is an example of the program, like a very tangible one, but I think E is the ongoing overall program. Yeah, please hold for one moment. We're just going to get some words. I guess my concern is we're making it look like it's just part of this one plan where it's actually across the whole shoreline adaptation. This is not, we're not, yeah. I think we need to just put shoreline adaptation plan as in it's the overall program, not just specific to this one.
This is a big subject, Mr. Chair, to sort of rush this wording with.
Yes, Councillor, and my belief is that this is already what is happening, but I think it's important to acknowledge. I guess what I'm trying to say, and this is not really within standing orders that I'm talking back with you, Councillor Butley, but I'm happy to have it in there, but this is, I don't want to minimise what the team is doing in partnership with mana whenua on this full program, because this is the way it is happening. That is not, we don't need to ask because it is the way, the approach from the beginning, which I think has been.
Mr. Chair, I think we need to be a little bit cautious too, because that work program probably sits under the local board. And so, you know, far be it for the governing body to be telling the local board how it should be prioritising which work program. And so I think when you dig down and have a look at the whole adaptation plan, there is a lot of detail in there. And if you talk to the team, they will, working with mana whenua and iwi is underpinned, and it's some of those processes, as Edith sort of talked about before. And so I don't think I think it's dangerous territory for us to get into when we start to talk about those work programs that sit, probably most of them, within a local board, and I would not support us sitting there trying to tell any local board what their work program should look like.
Here.
Yeah, and this is, Councillor Baker, you are the mover, so that we cannot add that without your approval. I guess and it's no criticism of anyone, but I guess this is already happening, so we're debating something that is, and now we've made it sort of Paul, did you have something to add?
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you. I think you're right. The point that I just wanted to reinforce was right from the outset of the Coastal Management Framework from 2017, it was made clear that the approach to coastal management on behalf of Auckland Council was in partnership with iwi. You'll notice that in the founding documents for each SAP as well, we reference that partnership, and that is why you see us sitting here today with our iwi partners. It is baked into the guidance and the priorities that mana whenua have gifted to support the shoreline adaptation plans as well. So it is baked in, it is reinforced. I'm not sure we need a standalone addition, would be my thoughts. Kia ora.
Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Chair. I was just responding to what I'm hearing from Edith. That's why I raised it, because clearly it's not a priority, because she's here asking us to pay specific attention to the funding for it. So that's why I said that.
Yeah, but I think that is a different, yeah, it's a different process that I think that all our staff need to take on right across the organisation. But I think if we narrow it down just to this one thing, I think that it's not, I don't want to put words in Edith's mouth, and we're probably getting into the debate, so I should have asked everyone to move back from the table now because we're debating our speakers. But you're welcome to put up an amendment, Councillor Bartley. Councillor Baker's not happy with it there. I think because it was an official amendment with wording, I may have misinterpreted what the words you have asked for. So
Question, please. To help.
Deputy Mayor.
My question is to Councillor Bartley. Look, I think everyone knows what you want to do, but I think it's a precedent setting for us in local board space. I think what's there probably, just to help you, if you maybe we can write to the local board chairs as individuals, but I think to move something potentially at this stage, would you be happy with that, Councillor Bartley?
Oh yeah, I'm not trying to tell local boards what to do. This is obviously regional, which is why it's here at governing body. So I was just seeking some direction from us about prioritising what mana whenua are saying.
Deputy Chair.
I don't know if this will help either, but indeed, could it just be, because the coastal renewals is the regional work, including the coastal renewals work program will require ongoing investment and engagement with local iwi. It's the money that Councillor Bartley is wanting to get a priority over, the regional funding.
Through the chair, we also deal with funding in C1 and 2. It's very clear that this is not intending to be a funding discussion or a prioritisation of that. We want to complete all of these plans across the region, and then there will become a prioritisation which local boards will be involved in. That some of that funding, some of it will be regional. We understand that. So I guess my recommendation is to remove the E that we've been trying to put up there, not because it's not important, but because, as Paul and the team have said, that is how we operate, that is what we are doing, and it is the next stage when we're talking funding, whether that's at this committee or at local boards. We will be working with local iwi about what that even is anyway. And I'm hoping that iwi would be sitting up with Lara and Natasha and the team at the same time through that funding discussion. So I completely understand what you're trying to achieve, but that is I think is a little too broad a remit for the particular plan we're looking at the moment. That would be my recommendation to the committee.
And the other thing, we've got the Cultural Initiatives Fund at item 13, and I think it would be good to ask questions there if it's about broadening that scope for the LTP, if potentially there is ways to support through helping Urupa and Marae and Papakainga, how we can help make them more resilient, either through that fund or a different fund. And I think that would enable and empower iwi mana whenua groups to fund their own work with support from us, rather than us trying to do it the other way around.
Kia ora. Thank you. Yep, I'm happy to take E out, and also Councillor Al for speaking to Edith about it. So she's happy with D, so that's cool. I just want to make sure people know they've been heard. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Bartley.
Chair.
I appreciate it. I think the conversation's been good, but it also shows the officers what we need to be doing and where else we can be picking this up. I will now move, as we started getting a debate, our speakers to move from the table so that we're not debating through you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. There are two separate motions, but can we take them together, or we take them separate?
Well, I think we take the first
one. Oh, yeah.
And then we can look at the revised wording.
Kia ora. Are there any, Councillor Baker, did you want to speak?
Oh, so are we doing them separately? We're doing them together?
We're going to go item 9 and then item 10, but you can...
I'll save my comments for item 9 because it's more relevant. I'll just support this one.
Sorry, 8, sorry. So support this one? Right. Are there any speakers on item 8? Right. I'll just speak briefly, just once again, thank mana whenua, thank our staff, thanks our local board and communities. This is crucially important. What this does, though, is it helps us prioritise for the long-term plan, for our budgets, renewals budgets. It means that the randomness of the past, where we kind of fixed something that was broken and then a storm came back 2 years later and ripped it up again, and then we have to spend $1 million. And again, this is hoping to change that. We have a more sustainable funding model for this work, but also work with communities to understand those changes, understand mana whenua's goals in this space, and prioritise that work to protect what's important, but also help people understand those changes. Because it is pretty tough, it is hard for people to see these maps and think, this is my favourite place I come to every day and it may not be here in the future. Surely we can protect it, but there potentially may not be that option in the future, because we are, I have seen several millions of dollars spent on our coastline in areas after the tempest in 2018, and some of that has been washed away. Significant amounts of it has been washed away in January and through Cyclone Gabrielle. So we do need to be thinking not only from environmental mana whenua, but also cost pressures around where is a good piece of spend, and then how do we work with communities to still create those great spaces, but maybe in a different way than we may have done in the past. Councillor Turner.
So a question to you, Mr. Chair. I can't support this if in the near future, during the long-term plan discussion, it's used as a speed bump to actually achieving some of the savings. When you describe that this is going to stop us approaching certain issues, and I know what you're explaining, but where does this tie into the long-term plan, which, the long-term plan, we're told, is where we're going to make savings and operational changes in order to be effective and efficient. Is this in some way going to hamper that?
Councillor Turner, we're in debate for this one. We might answer that question in item 9. So we'll just pass this one and then we can revert back to questions. Are there any other debating points for item 8? Right, all those in favour? Any opposed? Abstention from Councillor Turner. Would you like that recorded? Right. So quickly we'll move to item 9, and because maybe we'll have is it, Megan, were you wanting to answer Councillor Turner's question on that?
Through the chair again, the idea behind these plans is for us to complete them across the region and then be able to take a more holistic look. So we know that we're perhaps a couple of years away or so from completing all of those plans. So, but as part of a service or a function that we have, and whatever kind of decisions we make, whether that's at a regional level or a local board level, on particularly CapEx, that will have a budgetary impact, of course. So I don't think this will necessarily have direct discussions happening as part of the long-term plan, but in some, certainly some years, 2 or 3 years' time, there will need to be an acknowledgement that this is, or an agreement that this is a function that we have, and that we've put some money towards it, and we need to make a prioritisation, have prioritisation discussions about what comes first. I won't imagine that everything will be able to be afforded to happen at the same time. So it will be a prioritisation, and it will be a function conversation if you agree that this is a function that council holds and should continue to do into the future.
Can I just ask a little on? So I'm understanding that, I think, but channeling Councillor Newman's words, are we heading down an unfunded mandate path? Because this thing is just about council land only. It's not about the entire coastline. And as I described before, the scope of its effects, especially in cost, is not measured.
So that's what we've tried to be very clear about in D, is that we won't know all the costs of this. the costs might change depending on how quickly you do things and how kind of hard you want to work on it. So yes, in that sense, it's unfunded, but we've been really clear and upfront right from the beginning, is you kind of need to know what the challenges are or the future could be sometimes before you can cost them. So yes, in that sense, you're right, but we have a plan for it, and we have a clear understanding that there'll need to be prioritisation, and things may not happen as quickly as they need to do, and so that's where prioritisation and trade-offs come in.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Baker, you'd like to speak at this?
Yeah, I don't know if Alf's got a question.
Councillor Filipina.
Megan, just a question to you in regards to any prioritisation of budgets, is that when we end up getting the information that it forms the budget request, it'll come through, obviously the budget committee, I think, is the new one that we've got. So is that the process that will happen with any prioritised project? Is that the information is then put in front of the relevant committee to make a decision?
Yes, that's right, and of course it could be local boards as we talked around the table today. So yes, there will be a political discussion around the prioritisation of these things, yeah.
Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. And just remember, there is assets that we do fund, and we use these, what we've already done, to help direct what we do in the assets short term, but the overall strategy, we're hoping to have a long-term strategy when all of them are done. But of course, we use the information, the learning, the understandings, and the relationships through this process to redirect or prioritise. That's constantly what our staff are doing in this space. They have to look at individual items as part of an overall regional budget or regional plan for our coast. Councillor Baker, you'd like to speak?
Yes, I'll be quick, Mr Chair, because we're probably heading towards dinner as opposed to lunch. Look, I just want to acknowledge, firstly, the process and the team in terms of how they've gone about this. And we've heard about the partnership with mana whenua, but it's also been a really good partnership with communities. And Franklin's been very, very fortunate to have East and West Coast dealt with these adaptation plans. And at all times, the engagement with the community has been outstanding. So I just want to, Paul and your team and Natasha Lara and Joe Morris, who's been there at the forefront of all of these meetings. We've got a lot of coast, we've got a lot of little communities, and they are all heavily invested into this. Some of them are multi-generational landowners adjacent to council reserves, etc., etc. So acknowledge you. Edith, I just want to acknowledge you, my mate. It's great to see you. And it was fantastic to see the images there of the mana whenua groups, and to see someone like George Flavel there, who was acknowledged this year in the honours system for his contribution. So fantastic to see, and to see, that partnership working, and then Angela and the local board. Obviously, this started last term, and the whole way, and so I take really seriously when the local board sort of say we've got a couple of issues here, because it has been a great collaboration. And so I do want to acknowledge the discussions we've been having in the last day or so, Paul and the team, about how we can actually just respond in a meaningful way, but without digging into the detail that allows us to look at some of those areas and those concerns. So I want to acknowledge that. These are great plans, and one of the things that I think it comes back to, we're dealing with primarily at this point in time council land and council reserves and things like that, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think we've done it. We've shown at Glenbrook Beach how we work with private landowners who are adjacent in terms of how we enable them to get the coastal consents, which are tricky, which are gnarly, expensive, and that's worked really well. And so I really want to see that continue, where council can lead and help and work with private landowners who are wanting to do exactly the same as we are, protecting their land against the environment and the sea. And in this part of the area, Awhitu is one of the world's largest historic
sand dunes, and she's a dynamic place, and the Manukau Harbour is a pretty dynamic place that hasn't been looked after, and so I just want to acknowledge you. I really do support these. Thank you for Paul with your, happy to make that commitment in terms of going back to the local board, going back to the thing. Your lunch is there, mate. And so yeah, thank you.
Good, thank you, Councillor Baker. There are no more comments. All those in favour? Aye. Any opposed? No. Perfect. Thank you very much. We're going to have a half-hour break for lunch now, and then we'll be back to get through the rest of the agenda in record time. Kia ora, thank you.